turn it. Awesome. So a couple things. For the people that are here, there are handouts on the chair behind you. So there are two different documents. One is the budget presentation to the congregation. The other is kind of the budget numbers itself. Great for a full read. I don't know if you can do it while you're with us today, but I'll have you try. For those on Zoom, you can speak and share any questions that you have. You can just take yourself off mute, and then we can have you as a part of it. All right, so I'll just give a very, very high level first, and then I'll turn it over to Dave. Obviously, we've had some really interesting years at the daycare and the church with the pandemic, and we've been very lucky to have really strong leaders at this church who have done their due diligence and secured PPP loans and other loans that have really helped us through this time. This is an interesting year because we're kind of shifting into an environment where we don't have as much of those loans. So we have to shift to being a lot more self-reliant. So it is a difficult task, but with the help of God and moving some dials and pulling some levers, I do believe that we can get there. We started working on the budget over a month ago and brought in some wonderful experts and leaders to help guide this process. We had, I would say, more meetings than usual for budget, just due to how serious this task is. And so I'll leave my thanks till the end for those particular leaders that helped make this possible. Just a quick note on kind of how we'll move through things. So I think today we're going to start with the motion and second it. So if you feel like we're kind of rushing into a decision, we're not, because after that we'll open it up and fully discuss kind of what we're doing here with the budget, and we'll have time for discussion, and everyone will have a chance to ask any questions or get your thoughts heard. So I'll pass it. Oh, you know what? I'm going to have Pastor start us off with prayer.
It's all right. I don't think there is a necessary order to those things. I do just want to echo too what Brian said and say there have been tremendous challenges. The way I would describe these recent years is really like once you figure out the solution to one problem, something else pops open. So you can think of that as a leaky dam where you're sticking your fingers in. It feels like that sometimes. But just endless tasks to get to. And that is not only technically challenging, but it's also a challenge to endurance of a team. How do we support one another through those things? And I just want to say, I've served multiple churches, have loved them all in their unique ways, but really I have not loved anything more than working with the leaders here through those challenges. Just lots and lots of faithfulness, as well as gifts and skill to share. So love that, and love the opportunity to keep on plugging those holes as we go forward. But let us open in prayer. The Lord be with you. God, we give you thanks for your abundant faithfulness, for your abundant generosity. We give you thanks for the opportunity to settle in and worship and to praise and experience Sabbath even as we enter into this meeting, that we might be centered and focused on you, on your love and mercy that you pour out upon us and through us and into this world. I give you thanks for the faithfulness of many leaders who have been contributing to challenging solutions and who've come up with a budget to present this day. We pray your blessings upon our deliberation, and we pray your blessings upon whatever decisions we make going forward, that they might be wise and indeed sustain our faith community and our child care center in the coming year. Abide with us, give us deep and joyous faith. In Jesus' name, amen.
right, so I would like to make a motion as printed. I'll read it for those on Zoom. I apologize, I didn't think to provision the people on Zoom with handouts, one of those new problems that Ryan was talking about. But I move that the congregation adopt the attached budget for the 22-23 fiscal year. And additionally, the congregation commits in good faith to a year-end bonus for Pastor Ryan, should circumstances allow. Is there a second? Okay. So let me talk about the budget a little bit. Brian kind of gave a pretty good introduction. We've gone through a couple of very interesting years. We have not been back to new normal yet. This is the year we really have to get to that new normal and kind of, get back to an even keel. And I won't talk a lot about the numbers. I'll briefly highlight one or two things when we get to that. But basically what we've got now is a budget that pretty much breaks even from a cash flow standpoint. So it's basically, we're not putting anything in the bank. We're not really taking anything out of the bank. That's kind of where it's at. And we'll be happy if we achieve that. And I think we have a reasonable hope of achieving that. So you've got notes that I've handed out. I'm not going to go through all of them, read all of them in detail. But I'll just mention that kind of one of the high-level balancing acts is we know we have to raise tuition because our costs are going up and we need to be able to break even. We don't have the PPP loan forgiveness and stuff anymore to count on. But we also can't raise rates so much that we price ourselves out of the market or give parents sticker shock and they pull their kids out of daycare and take care of them at home, things like that. So that's been one kind of the balances, and I'll talk a little about how we did that when we get there. But and then the other balance, other key thing that we have struggled with is we also want to recognize staff and reward them, both the congregational staff and the child care center staff, because they're also struggling with inflation and all that, and so we want to give out raises and things like that. So that's been kind of some of the big dichotomy that we've had to deal with. I do have the budget committee listed there. Brian already alluded to the fact there were a lot of meetings. We've got more person hours in this budget than any other budget I've experienced in terms of ongoing meetings, long meetings sometimes. And I'll just briefly mention that Brian Wilcox in particular, who in addition to being our music director is our staff accountant, has put a lot of time and energy into modeling at a very detailed level the tuition income and the salaries that we pay and things like that. So, but every member of the committee has been on very long Zoom calls. Let me quickly go through a couple of the key things just so you know what we did. And certainly if there's more questions on them, you can read the words and then ask any questions you want at this meeting. But as far as general fund giving, we did budget that up a little bit from last year. We think that's consistent with the trends. I'm not going to talk a lot about detail about that. Tuition, I sort of alluded to, the actual numbers are in there. We did increase it 6% on the infant program, 7% on the toddler, and 5% on the preschool. Preschool is lowest because it's one of the more competitive ones. So these are not up with inflation, but we did do some benchmarking of surrounding centers. We're reasonably comfortable that we're not going to price ourselves out, but we didn't feel as a committee that there was room to go any further than we did. We're kind of at the edge there. And one thing to recognize, even though inflation might be running 8, 9, whatever percent, 10%, depending how you look at it, this represents a fairly significant shock, I'll say, to families with kids in daycare, and not that they'd be necessarily different than anybody else's daycare, but recognize that it's tough on those folks. The other thing I want to talk about in just a teeny bit of detail is the occupancy assumption. So last year we did two things that, with hindsight, didn't serve us well. The first was we didn't have a structured process in place. We really haven't for over a decade for assessing, whether the parents in the program are going to come back in the fall. And so we were surprised last fall, and we mentioned this at the annual meeting in February, March, that there were a number of families who, for no particular bad reason, just were moving on and pulling their kids out. They were moving, they were taking care of the kids in a different way, whatever. And so that kind of put us in a hole starting out last year. And then the other thing we typically have done is we typically budget for some amount of growth. Our expectation is we should be able to grow the occupancy and the attendance, especially if we're making it a priority. So what we did this year is we did two things. Number one is Courtney, who was the daycare director up until a week ago, child care director, basically reached out to every family and validated their intent to come back this fall, or if they weren't going to come back, we knew that. And then the other thing that we've done is we have only planned for children that we know about. So that's either people already in the center or people who have already basically come in and said, we're going to put our kids in the center, which for the most part is babies on the way. There might be one or two others. And so we've tried to be kind of conservative starting out the year. We really need to get more kids in than that to be comfortable and to, kind of build our cash reserves back up and things like that. So the hope and expectation is we're actually going to do better than that, but we've deliberately tried to be very conservative. So when we say we're basically break even, we think there's upside. There's also risk. All it takes is an economic shock or, some other thing, and, a couple families leave, and that's kind of significant in where we're at. So there is some risk too, but we've tried to be as conservative as we think we can and allow for, the fact that we're hopefully going to outperform this. The last thing I'm going to briefly mention is just state grants, because that's a sort of a new thing too. We've been getting some state grants for the last couple of years, and the way the state does it is a certain fraction that has to go directly to teachers' increased compensation. And so what we've budgeted for is an amount that I think we can feel reasonably confident can be used for general fund purposes. Again, hopefully that's a little bit conservative. It'll actually be more. It's going to depend on how much the state gives us, and then there's a lot of complicated math we have to do to make sure we are staying within the grant limits. So it's in the budget now is $20,000 for that. That's pretty safe. If we get more, some of it's going to go to the general fund, some of it's going to go to the teachers and, for example, bonuses. That's kind of it in income. Salaries, I'll just mention, is probably one of the topics that has gotten the most discussion and debate. What we ended up with is a 3% across the board increase, which, for our staff doesn't keep up with inflation. It's not all that different than a lot of other big companies, and actually Senate guidelines moved by 3% this year as well. And so it's not inconsistent with what other places are doing. It's not what we would want to do. And I do want to specifically talk a little bit about the pastor's salary, because those who were around when he was called 3 years ago may recall that we brought him in below the Senate guidelines for compensation. They publish kind of ranges that they want you to recommend that you be within. And we as a congregation, as part of that call process, made a good faith commitment to basically get Ryan up to those compensation levels within 3 years. Now, it was recognized on both sides that that was contingent on our ability to do that financially, so that was understood up front, but we made a good faith commitment. And the first 2 years that we gave Ryan raises, we basically got, about a third of the way each year to that, give or take. This would have been the third year where we'd be at the Senate guidelines. We're not at that level. So after a lot of angst and debate, what the Finance Committee and the Council are recommending is we keep Ryan at the same 3% as the other staff, but we basically make, again, a good faith commitment that if we're sitting here next summer and let's say the occupancy has gone up, we're sitting in a reasonable financial spot, is we'd basically give them a year-end bonus, you could think of it. And so there isn't a specific amount other than the gap to the guidelines would sort of be in the range of what we might discuss. And we're not committing it, but we're saying that in good faith, if the money is there, we would do that. And the way we'd actually implement that is we put into next year's budget, so we don't have to get all hung up on exactly what circumstances, might do it and exactly what amount. We'll figure that out next summer. And we've, basically are agreeing that we'll do that with again, good faith. I can't think of a different way to put it. So that's the salaries. Everything in here, the Finance Committee went through line by line. Some of the smaller things we didn't spend a lot of time on. So actually with that, I'm going to just, let me just double check. Yeah, I'm going to hop over to the budget real quick. I'm not going to go through any of this in detail. I will take any questions, but at the top you see the bottom line cash. And so it's kind of like the bottom line of the budget, but then we also do some adjustments to cash because there's things we have to spend money on that don't count as expenses because of the way the accounting works. And so that's kind of the bottom line that, for the check count. And if you look at this as being about a $1.1 million operation, the 5664 at the top is basically break even. That's in the noise. And so just think of it as a break even budget. One of the things we did, we've always done this, we did it better this year, is almost every line has a comment. So if you're trying to figure out where did the finance committee pull that number from, it at least has some sort of breadcrumbs. We've always done it. Again, we've done it better this year. You have to thank Brian Wilcox for that, because a lot of times we'd be discussing stuff and I'd be ready to move on, and Brian's like, we should write that down. And then I would write it down, you know. And so Brian's been very good at keeping me diligent in that. So I think that's it. So with this, I'll open it up for further discussion. You can do one of three things. If you're on the finance committee, you want to make a comment, you can. I'll get back to that. If you want to ask any questions, you can. And if you have any concerns with the budget, you can express those concerns. I want to briefly mention for the Finance Committee and the Council, I did, as I was putting the final copy together last night, find one small mistake in the way stuff was rolling up. So it's not that the budget numbers are different, but the total is just slightly different than what you saw by about $1,000. I was going to send you guys an email last night. I forgot. I'll send it today. But I just want to let you know, just for disclosure, that it's very slightly different than what you guys saw. So with that, questions, comments, concerns?
Could you have people come to this mic if they like that? Yes. All right. All right. So yeah, please come to. I don't have a comment, so I'm not coming to speak to anything. But please, just like I'm doing, come to this mic and almost eat it as you talk. Yeah.
So while we're giving people a moment to think if they want to, get up and ask a question, I'll also mention that if you take this home and you ever have questions, or if you just want to, in general, know more about how the finances of the church work or what anything means or anything like that, you can always reach out to any one of a number of people. I'm very available on email. You can send me email. If you want to know how stuff actually happens, Penny's your best source. Every so often I say something where I think I know how things work, and then Penny will correct me. By all means, this is our budget, our finances. So if you ever have any questions, just don't hesitate to drop an email.
I just have a quick question. So regarding TLC, advertising and getting more people in, which would increase revenue, and also getting more people into the congregation to increase revenue with giving and so forth, what's being done to try to grow the business, so to speak? Yep.
So I'll tackle what I can out of that, and then if Ryan or Brian or anybody wants to hop in, they can. So as far as the TLC side goes, that's the one I have the most visibility into. There's probably two things that have changed over the last year or two. One of them, I think, is just the emphasis. I think we've had under the prior director, we're kind of in a little bit of a steady decline, and I think when Courtney came in, as a council and as a pastor and as a leadership team, there's just been a lot more emphasis on the fact that we really needed to get the enrollment up, and that's part of the job of that director. Now, obviously, the pandemic hit. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and so that's hurt. The other thing that's very specific, though, that I'll mention is we now are on care.com, which is a quite ubiquitous site for everything from babysitters to daycare to whatever. And so that's one place that many people would go to find a referral these days, is care.com. And so we are on there, and we get quite a few referrals from that. We haven't actually kept statistics on how many of those turn into kids. I've actually suggested that. I don't know if Ryan has flowed that to Courtney. Courtney's gone now anyway, but we do get quite a few referrals off that, and that's really the way to get kids these days. I think the two things are word of mouth and sites like care.com and social media. That's really where I get them. I mean, the banner out front helps, but those things. That's as far as I'm going to go.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then we are moving through kind of the interview, kind of hiring process for the new TLC director, and certainly a lot of focus on how is that leader kind of is going to work with Pastor and do some of those things to grow it. But primarily it has been care.com as far as how we're building our families.
Yeah, great question, Chuck, by the way, great. But I guess the things I would say on that would be, we do often think of those just kind of like you laid out, child care center and congregation. And whether we think of it as building up business or community, the truth is it's both, right? I mean, those organizationally, it's building us up. It's also at the core of our mission, to be community and build up community. So on the child care center side, just like you've been hearing, I think tremendous work has been done with Courtney, and we anticipate that continuing with a new director in a more focused way to look at efforts like enrollment and marketing and tracking and all these kind of pieces, basically kind of raise our professional business standards and how we do these things. Honestly, I've learned a ton in the last 2 years too, and that's been really good. So there are a lot of things, if anybody's interested, I think it's beyond the scope of probably this conversation today, but just process things that we do different, ways that we handle finances and do things differently month to month. And so there's a lot of improvements. And again, I do think that was identified prior to Courtney's coming as a need, that we didn't necessarily do those things very well under previous leadership. Not to disparage anyone. They did other things wonderfully, but like the business stuff wasn't necessarily the focus. So very much in our director search, like Brian has mentioned, we want other qualities too, early childhood, nurture, team development, all those things. But man, we are probably more focused on business savvy with a director than we've ever been. And then to speak again to the congregational side, little different. I think in some ways, if I'm totally frank, a lot of our effort and energy has gone to the child care center necessarily in these last 2 years. And so there's a little bit of rebalancing of that as we get to places where it's more stable. Some of that too, though, realistically is allowing people to figure out their participation patterns. And that is very slow too. So my encouragement for us too is to be very open to different kinds of participation patterns. Worship is an example of that, is that there's sometimes frustration that we don't have the kind of numbers in worship that we'd want to, even coming out of the pandemic by this point. Or maybe it's different programmatic efforts. Part of me would just counsel, as your pastor would say, be thankful for where we're at. It's good, like worship is good, confirmation is good, Sunday school coming back is good. All those things are good. I think if we want to put energy, and we are, it's things like our faith practices, neighboring practices events. And so I love to hold those up because over the summer we've had like these 4 or 5 events that we've done, events like ice cream truck after school pickup time, or morning and coffee treats midweek at pickup at drop-off time for the families, or we had this kind of pizza night social event. All those kind of things again are really designed to be things that the church and Child Care Center both participate in, and we've been pretty successful in getting that mix. We'll actually hopefully hear about this a little bit in worship on the 4th. We're going to feature that a little bit, but whenever we end up talking about those neighboring practices events, the thing I hear from folks is like, wow, there's all these young families. It's awesome, and they like us, and we like them, and this is great. So all those feels, I think, that we long for in terms of engagement with young families are happening, but they aren't necessarily happening in the spaces that were happening before the pandemic. And again, doesn't mean they won't happen in worship and Sunday school again in the days to come, but I would definitely encourage and invite on the congregational side us to continue investing energy into these kind of non-traditional spaces where we're engaging families in our neighborhood, in our child care center, and building relationship. Sometimes that growth is really incremental and it takes time to build relationships, but it's solid, it's life-giving, and I think in the end, it's exactly what we need to be about. There are my comments.
Yeah, and actually on the childcare side, one other thing to mention that's potentially important is I think everybody knows that we've been NACE certified for about a decade now, or whatever it is, and that's a national certification. In order to get county kids, though, people sponsored, for example, by Hennepin County for, like foster kids, things like that, you have to be certified as parent aware, which is a Minnesota state accreditation. And the council's talked about that on and off for probably about a decade. But it never really got traction. And then in the last couple of years, that became a major push, and that became one of Courtney's objectives, was to get us Parent Aware certified. And so just in the last couple months, when was it?
Actually, we got the official like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so within the last month, we got the official letter saying we're parent aware, and that does two things. On a very small level, we get like a $2,000 grant a year towards supplies and stuff, so that's $2,000. But more importantly, well, secondly, it's a nice thing to advertise. A lot of centers are parent aware. If you don't have that, it's a thing. But it does open the door to us once again getting, for example, county kids and stuff like that. So that's another possible growth in the occupancy now that we've removed that barrier, because without the parent aware, you can't have those kids, or at least they're very difficult to get in the door. So hopefully, Chuck, hopefully that was useful, and hopefully it was useful to everybody, because I think that's actually a really good question. Where are we going as a congregation? I think between the three of us, you've heard a lot of useful information about what has been happening, what is happening. So, more questions or discussion?
Sounds like we're ready to vote. So so as to the motion that the congregation adopt the budget, we'll start with all in favor. All in favor, raise your hand. All right. And do we need to count that? I think we need to count. Okay. And Verna, do you have a count? I can count. 3, 6, 8, 9. I'm counting. 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 21. I think we got 21. 22. Okay. All right. And then all opposed. 22. All opposed, raise your hand. That's looking to me like 0. So the motion, sorry? Abstentions? Any abstentions? All right, thank you for that. Well, it looks like the motion passes, and we've got a budget, so thank you so much for doing that. I do want to say a quick thanks to all the people that put this together. Dave Erstad, Brian Wilcox, Jenny Mackin put in a lot of work to just drill down into these numbers, double, triple checking everything. So a huge thank you to them for all the time. And then everyone else, Penny, Ryan, myself, and then the full council, thanks for all the hard work and all of this service to the church. Great, thanks everyone. We can, do we do a formal closing of the meeting? All right, move to adjourn. Any seconds? All in favor of closing, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, super. Fellowship. All right, fellowship time. Thanks, everyone.